So my grandfather went to Annapolis class in 1928. So he actually was the same year as Darren Criss's character, Eugene Lindsay. So, I kind of grew up, some kids grew up with comic books. I grew up with the Navy. I'd flip through, as I was growing up. And I have to say that it was enormously impactful to be able to come out here and shoot at Pearl Harbor. It was the first 2 weeks of shooting, and to have the crew driving past the Arizonas there coming into work. I think it set the right tone and made everyone appreciate that this was an important story and one that we needed to tell correctly.
Well, when I heard that the movie comes out on Veterans Day, I was really happy about that because, in a weird way, what we wanted to do with this movie kind of put a monument to these more or less unsung heroes, because most of the pilots, we like kind of portray are not like in the like kind of not very well known. So, and you make a movie like this so these their bravery isn't forgotten. That's and the Veterans Day has like kind of some sort of a good feel for this movie.
Well, I think there is no better time for a story like Midway to be seen by younger generations, because it's the ultimate generation that we can say thank you to for living in freedom and in democracy. If these kids, which they were, wouldn't have defied their own lives, and most of them knew that they were not going to come back, and they did all this for future generations. And I think now we're living at a time where that kind of patriotism is dearly missing all around us.
I think it's also important to remember that, we didn't just make this movie to honor the people who served in 1942, it's also to honor the people who continue to serve. And we've lived in an environment where we've had military serving on the front lines for, it's been almost 2 decades now. And a lot of the time we forget that. So this movie is a reminder of, not just the service members in the past, but those who continue to serve our country.
What we kind of forget is America didn't want to get into the war. And because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, then they willingly did. But they were not really quite prepared enough. So, in a way, when like kind of Nimitz came to Pearl Harbor, he had to really rise the spirits of people and like kind of and tell them, yes, we can do it. And he, and I think he was like a good leader that way. That he didn't like kind of scold people. That he didn't say like, oh, you like kind of screwed up Pearl Harbor. For example, this Navy intelligence officer, Edwin Layton, he like kind of wanted to actually leave and go on a ship, and he said, no, your place has to be here. You are like kind of there. You can do much more than in the war effort. So he was like the Americans were really the underdog, and we forget that. That they were the underdogs.
I think from a movie entertainment kind of story or angle, which obviously whenever you make a movie of this size, you don't want to make a gigantic history lesson. So from the entertainment level of this all and the storytelling and the ride you go on here, is that this is probably the biggest underdog story in the history of World War II. I wouldn't know where else, a few people who believed in their cause were going up against such an overwhelming enemy. And just because, their spirits were high, because their leaders were courageous, when all those things came together, they kind of were able to pull off the impossible. And that's why we live in freedom, or one of the big reasons why we live in freedom and democracy in our country here right now.
When these guys were talking about how to frame the movie, they were always, I thought it'd just be about the Battle of Midway, and they pointed out it should begin with Pearl Harbor, because as Harold was just saying, this is the greatest military comeback story, I think, in history, that you frame it with the darkest day in American history, which is, the attack on Pearl Harbor. And just 6 months later, you have this event that turns the tide of the war. So how did that happen? And that's what the story of the movie is.
Well, it's because it shaped all of our lives. Everybody who is here on this island, who is in this state, in this country, their lives have been altered through World War II. Many people lost incredible losses in family members. Others were dislocated. I don't think there's anybody wandering on our streets these days who hasn't been kind of influenced by the outcomings of World War II, and that's such a monumental event in our history. So that's why we keep looking back at it and discovering new angles to understand what happened to the world in those days.
It's been very powerful as I talk to people about the movie. Often it's kind of an impetus for them to talk to their own grandparents or parents or great-grandparents about what they did. And what was so fascinating about going out and seeing the RV Petrel and the work they've done to find the Kaga is realizing that this is, first of all, historically important. It's going to help answer questions about this battle. But also, that's hallowed ground. There are 400 men who went down on that ship. And in a place like Japan that is so interested in their ancestors, to find this and be able to tell those families that we know what happened to your great-grandparents or grandparents, I think I'm very glad that the movie was able to be part of something like that.
Well, there's something in this movie, which I think people haven't seen. It's dive bombing, and when I, kind of designed these scenes, we always kind of said, how could have people done that? Today, we use missiles to do that. In that day, there was a man or two men sitting in a plane flying, down on a ship, which was and got shot at, and the bravery to do something like that is just incredible.
I mean, I'm most excited for people to see the cast, frankly. Roland's always been so great about assembling ensemble casts, and the challenge of this movie is there's so many stories that we wanted to tell because there's so many angles, and there are kind of three major storylines we're following. And it was so inspiring to show up to set every day and see these actors who had done so much research. They're showing up, sometimes with the biographies of their characters, or, Woody had gone to, see the Nimitz Museum. I think he felt a personal connection because of the tie to Texas, and had been on an aircraft carrier. So they all showed up and brought something really unique to the roles, and I think that meant a lot to all of us.
And for me, the most exciting thing is that I'm really kind of proud being part of this movie, because I feel this is one of the first epic war films where both sides are treated as equal, participants in a global conflict. And I really have to say, when I started, I was a little worried about the whole situation that we're doing again. The Japanese are the bad guys, we're the good guys. And the outcome of this film, for me, the most exciting part is that I actually walk out of here and say, we've done, or Roland has done, and obviously Wes, we've done kind of justice as best as we could to paint a picture of this is kind of how it went down.
Well, when you see how nationalism is rising all over the world, fascist parties, especially in Europe, you kind of get sometimes afraid, that a conflict like World War II could happen again. And then it's great that in a time of that, you remind people with a movie, that there were, not so long ago, people risking their life to fight for democracy and freedom. And in our times of, especially in America, with all the division which happens, and is existing, it's great to see what a unified America can do, and how actually without America, this world would look totally different. Wow. I mean, it's always great to see actors at their finest, and I think in this movie, especially, we had actors which all, gave their most, and on top of it, this was a very, very, nice group of people, It's this, it's always sounds maybe silly, but when you shoot a movie, Kurt Russell once said this to me, when we watch a movie, we cannot watch our own movies because we only see the hardship and the little mistakes we make, but we can have fun making movies, and that's our that's always my ideal now, what I'm always going for, trying to find a group which really fits together and tries to make a good movie.
was like shooting multiple movies also because of the storyline. So would get kind of actors for a couple weeks and then move to the next set of actors. So it was almost like they're running a camp. And then the final movie was Roland making his independent Japanese film, which was also its own challenges and really special.
It's also inspiring to see not only actors at their finest. It's also inspiring to see a director at his finest, putting all these pieces together. Sometimes I would be standing there and thinking like, why is he like, okay, now I understand. This is all going to be part of a huge tapestry, of a huge, massive image composition, and to see somebody working his world with such ease. Too many compliments? With such ease and knowing what he's doing, that's for me sometimes on the sideline a true joy, I have to say.
And the production design. To walk on set every day was fascinating. I mean, the work that they did, recreating these environments and making sure that everything in front of the camera was historically accurate. I mean, we're talking about Japanese carriers that have been under the sea since 1942. What do they look like? What it's like to be on that bridge? And the research they did to make sure that, you know, I as a child tried to imagine what these things were like, and you simply couldn't. You had to use your imagination. You're trying to just, you know, you're reading a paragraph. We had no idea. And to see it so vividly brought to life by Roland and then that incredible team behind them was, I think, for any history buff, it was like being at Disney World.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey You